I must say it's the first time that QXR has been a dog lover's haven. But it's nice to know that our audience is expanding. That's always helpful. And we are going to talk a little bit about, I think the panel is titled Behind the Music. And these two folks are very much behind the music in the sense of having come out of here with new ideas and putting them into action. And Carol, one of the things that you just told me, when I mentioned Robert Pace, there was no reaction from the listeners there. I guess we were there too early for most of the folks out there. But apparently you worked with him and studied with him.
Yes, I did work with Dr. Pace and study with him, and my piano teacher did the same. She had a more up-close relationship because she had been at TC many, many years before I came here. But I studied the Robert Pace method. That was how I learned to play the piano. And he had a multi-key approach that to some students might have been difficult, but I seemed to be able to catch on, and it helped me throughout my career.
What sparked your decision to come to Teachers College?
Both of my piano teachers came to TC. So the piano teacher that I had growing up went to Teachers College, and then when I went away to undergrad, my piano professor in college had also studied at Teachers College, and so they laid the path for me to come here.
Very good. And Jacqueline, you are, I found out again just now, we do high research, you see, for this program. At least 30 seconds before we go on, we learn all these things. And what I just found out is that you're a recent graduate, that you have come back after already having a major career. So what prompted that?
Yes, I did everything kind of the wrong way around. I've had I've been a good career. I'm a member of Alumnus 4, as we said. I'm a soloist and a voice teacher. But I always felt there was something missing. I didn't have an MA, and I didn't, not just that, but I also hadn't really done any research into methods of teaching and how to communicate to my students. And as my teaching developed, I thought there was something lacking in my knowledge. So everybody said, well, you've got to go to TC and do an MA in music and music education. So with a great deal of juggling, because I was on tour and I'm coming back for classes, and I remember at least one time being on an overnight flight from San Francisco and then coming straight to class the next morning. That was rough. But I made it work, and the TC faculty helped me make it work. And I think it's interesting that you're always in need of furthering your knowledge at whatever stage of your career you're in. I think you can always find a moment where I want to find out more. And that was really why I came back. And now I'm at Juilliard, because I hear that you were, I'm in the doctoral program at Juilliard now. So more juggling. I'm a glutton for punishment, I think.
Well, what did you learn about the principles of teaching? Because I remember once I had the idea of doing a broadcast with voice teachers. And I couldn't find any two voice teachers who were willing to be on the program with any other voice teacher. So, every voice teacher seems to have her own ideas, and never the twain shall meet.
That's definitely true. I think that at TC, learning kind of general strategies and approaches to how to communicate, how to establish rapport with your student, and then on top of that, you can put your own personal approach. I'm not a fan of the method approach that a lot of voice teachers have, where they have, these are the 5 exercises that you must do, and if you do them, you will be a wonderful singer. If you don't do them perfectly, you will not be. It's nonsense. Everything has to be tailored to fit the student, and I really felt that in my heart, and then when I came to TC, I had that reinforced, because that's exactly the point of TC. It's student-centered learning. You figure out, what does the student need, what does the student want, and that, it was great just to be here and have what I felt anyway reinforced and then developed.
Now, you have been with Alumnus 4 for quite a while.
Yeah, about 15 years.
Now, did what you learned here and what you're learning now at Juilliard, has that changed your method of singing yourself?
I don't know if it's changed my method of singing. I mean, everything feeds in, of course, and well, I mean, I studied with Dr. Jane Gothi-Finn here at TC, who's a wonderful teacher, and I'm now working with Sanford Sylvan at Juilliard. And certainly, as a singer, I think as any kind of musician, you're always learning. I think the idea that you reach a stage where lessons don't help, I think I don't agree with that. You're always learning, and you always need to have somebody, you know, monitoring your progress for you. And I think that certainly, yes, my approach to my singing definitely has been influenced by the people that I've encountered at TC.
Now, you brought along a short piece by Anonymous 4.
Yes, I've got a little. I wasn't sure if you've heard the group, so I've got a very, very short little piece I can play. It's about 2 minutes long.
What is it?
It's called Ecco la primavera. It's from our CD called The Second Circle. It's love songs by Francesco Landini. Anonymous 4 primarily sings what's medieval music we primarily sing, and within that it's primarily sacred, because that tends to be what was written down and what survived. But Landini is one of the few composers of secular music whose music survived, because it was all put in this giant codex called the Squarcialupi Codex, and it was all these Italian composers, their music was written down into this giant book. And Landini's music was especially popular, so there's over 100 pieces that survive. So I can play Ecco la primavera. It's very short and very cute.
About spring, I assume.
It's about spring. It's one of the happy ones. You know, the secular song, then and now, loves to talk about unrequited love. We just love it. We love being in love with someone who doesn't love us. Sad love songs, they're just the best. This is one of the few that actually is happy.
Okay. All right, let's hear Anonymous 4. See, we're in the modern age here.
That's not it.
All right, well, I'm very curious, now that you are a self-employed singer, according to the introduction.
Always
here.
have been, actually.
But obviously you cannot sing in that very pure style without, if you're doing modern works or Puccini or whatever. So we'll talk about that later, but I want to get to Carol now and find out, I presume, when you were working with Robert Pace and other teachers that you've had, it's, what shall I say, it's Mozart and Beethoven, and you are veered off in a different direction. You do some of your own compositions and you swirl around, I gather, classical and popular or jazz traditions.
Yes, I've stayed pretty consistent throughout my life. I'm classically trained, but now I can say I'm an artist because I write my own solo piano songs. But coming up, I mean, I learned to play Mozart and Beethoven and Chopin and all of the classics along with everyone else. And when I went to college and majored in music, I studied classical music. I did concerts. I gave recitals. I toured in Eastern Europe as a classical musician. But it wasn't until about the last 7 or 8 years that I started to write my own music. And my classical training came in handy for that because I found it easy to write. And all I had to do is find my own voice. So. And
that voice was not within even the contemporary classical tradition. It veered off much more closely to jazz, yes?
Yes, I call it pop, but you might hear some jazz elements in my playing as well. But I was able to express myself in a way that I wrote how I felt. And it just turned out to be using a pop structure.
Well, tell us about In C Major, which sounds pretty classical right there. This is first track, I think, off the, what did you call it? Center Cuts? I forgot what the...
Yes, there are 2 recordings that I brought today. The first one that I brought was Fresh Cuts.
Fresh Cuts, that's what it was.
It's a compilation album that was produced and released by Guitar Center. And Quincy Jones led that project, and he chose one of the songs from my full-length album to be on that project. And then I brought my full-length album, the C Major CD. So I call myself C Major because a lot of the songs I write are in the key of C, but I write in other keys. So you might even hear some songs in the key of A minor and so forth. But I call myself C Major because one of the first songs that I wrote that people paid attention to happened to be in the key of C, and I thought that was a good luck key for me. So I called myself C Major.
Yeah.
So
let's listen.
Okay. This is That's All Right from the Fresh Cut CD.
Remember the old days when you put a 78 on the turntable and you put the needle down and
Oh, well, I can tell you a little bit about it while we're waiting. It's about 3 minutes and 48 seconds, I think. Oh, no, 4 minutes and 3 seconds. Thank you.
Very lovely, and I see what you mean. It's not jazzy, but it's not classically either. It's somewhere in the middle. So this is not an improvisation in any way. This is a composed piece, yes?
Right. This is a composed piece using a simple structure. So you hear A, and then you'll hear B, and then you'll hear A again, and some other departure, but it's pretty structured. And I try to keep the melody simple and the harmony simple. So it's nothing too elaborate about it, but it's all based on how I felt at the time, which I use the theme of heartbreak and wonder. So if I'm heartbroken, I write a song about it. I just work through it. It's very cathartic, and it gets me through.
Just before, Jackie was saying that you never stop learning. And no, I'm going to ask you, really. That's what she very clearly stated. And I wonder if that applies to you. Do you feel that you are learning still? You are exploring new areas still?
Oh, absolutely, musically. So my next challenge would be to learn to play jazz. I mean, to improvise. I mean, that's something I still haven't learned to do, and wasn't influenced by my teachers to do so. I mean, they just said strictly just learn to play classical, and then Dr. Waldorf, you know, in college, he just said, I never learned to play jazz, and he was strictly just a concert artist, and he recorded himself, and he just played classical concerts, and that's what he did. So I think the next challenge is to learn to improvise.
Well, that's certainly an admirable goal. It's pretty tricky, I imagine, to swing into jazz when you haven't grown up with it. But
I grew up in Mississippi, interestingly enough. I mean, I should have been influenced more by blues and jazz, but for
well, maybe
some
it's
reason,
back there someplace, ready to spring forward.
Yes.
Jackie, then let me come back to you. And I did want to ask you, the Anonymous Four that you played for us, and much of the music that you do there requires very pure singing, especially in collaboration with three others. When you're off on your own, when you're singing modern music, when you're singing any other kind of music, you must use an entirely different kind of vocal production.
Well, not entirely, actually. In fact, I can play you an example if you would like to hear it.
Yeah.
Will I do that? That'd be queer. What I was going to say was that, you know, I know what my voice is best suited to, and that's early music and new music. You mentioned Puccini earlier. It's like, that's not happening. I'm not going to be singing. I was just at the Met, actually, listening to Cav Pag at the dress rehearsal, and it's like, this is so wonderful. This is not anything I will ever do.
Well, just for a minute, why not?
Oh, my voice isn't big enough. I mean, there's certain limitations. Each voice is different. Each voice has its own abilities. My voice is simply not big enough to sing grand opera like that.
See.
But I can sing. I do sing opera, but it depends on the forces, and it just depends on what's required of the voice. You know, it's the same thing with a giant voice being asked to pare it down to sing Renaissance music. They can't do it. They just can't. But I could play this if you would like to hear it. So.
Yeah, I want to hear it, but again, I want to know. Doing contemporary music has to be a totally different style and a totally different vocal approach somehow.
No, it's not. It's actually surprisingly not.
Why not?
Well, because so many composers want a cleaner, for want of a better way of putting it, early music sound, so that the complexities of the harmony that they've written and the melodic line isn't obscured by a lot of vibrato. They want a cleaner sound.
See.
A lot of composers love, a lot of people do early music and new music because they relate to each other extremely well.
That is indicated in the score, that they want that kind of pure line?
Well, I mean, if you're working with a living composer, you ask them usually, but they actually will seek out early music singers to
Okay, what
sing
is
their
the
music.
piece that you did bring us?
Well, what I can play for you is David Lang. I don't know if anybody, if you know who he is. He's a wonderful composer. He won Pulitzer Prize and all of that. And he wrote a piece for Anonymous for a 60-minute piece called Love Fail, all about how love, it doesn't always work out. And he very kindly wrote a solo for me to sing in the piece. It's a cappella, but it is solo, so my voice is allowed just to step out of the ensemble a little bit. So you can hear the kind of, maybe, I don't want to use the word compromise, but you can hear that it's more soloistic, but it's still within, I think, within the style. But I'll play it for you.
If I have to fast, I know that you will fast. If I have to wander on my knees, I know that you will wander all your days. If I have to suffer, I know that you will suffer. If I have to be impoverished, I know that you will be impoverished. If I have to be degraded, I know that you will be degraded if God wills it. If God wills it, so be it.
And obviously, we're back to unrequited love again, no matter what century you're in. So it's all right.
He took some of the texts from, I think, the Yom Kippur text, I believe it was. There's some passage that says, essentially, whatever happens to me will happen to you also. So if I have to drown, then you will drown. If I have to burn, you will burn, if God wills this. And he took that as a basis, and he wrote this text that basically says, well, we're in it together here, everybody. It's kind of an odd version of wedding vows, maybe. I don't know.
Jackie, as long as you have the mic there, what sort of advice do you have for young artists who are starting out on a career, need to build a reputation somehow? How do you suggest that they move forward?
Well, I think the most important thing is to find what your passion is in terms of the genre of music that you want to sing. I come across a lot of singers who desperately want to be, for example, I want to be a dramatic soprano and I want to sing Wagner, which is lovely, except that you have a voice that really, really suits Bach, and you would sing that really well. You have to love what you do, but you also have to know what your voice wants to do as well. And that isn't always the same thing. So I think it's finding your passion and finding what your voice really loves to sing, and hopefully those two things match. Because if you try to sing something that you don't feel strongly about, I'm sure you feel the way too, if you don't really feel passionately or you're not in love with what you're doing as a performer, it's not going to really get you as far as you would like, I think.
But once you have determined repertoire, the type of voice you have and the type of music you want to sing, you still have to make a career out of it. You have to be self-employed singer, as we said.
You do.
So in that way, what does a young artist need to do to build a career? What kind of beyond the singing is necessary?
Well, you've got to work on your voice, first of all, and maintain it. You have to audition. You have to get yourself known to people. I mean, for young singers, I think auditioning is hugely important. I always hated auditioning, and I really, it's such an odd thing to do, to stand in a room with people that you don't know and sing to them something out of context. It's such a weird thing. But you have to do it. You have to get known. You have to meet with people, and you build. You know, if you get offered something, then you invite people to come see it. Hopefully somebody will offer you something else, and gradually things will build. But you also have to be patient, and you have to also be open to your career taking a turn that you didn't expect that it might. I never expected I would sing medieval music in my entire life, and the opportunity came up, and I took it. And obviously, I have no regrets about that. But it's not something I plan to do. So I think always be open for the unexpected.
And I guess you have to be ready to accept a lot of rejection as well.
Yes, you really do. That's the other lovely thing about auditions. You could put your heart and soul into them, and then it's, we'll call you. So yes, rejection is a huge part of performing, and it's why a lot of people give up. And I would say one thing though, if you're continually being rejected for a certain kind of repertoire that you're trying to do, well, maybe listen to the feedback, because sometimes rejection is really helpful in terms of why it's happening. And you're always going to get rejected for something, but if there's a consistency about it, listen to that and learn from it rather than just let it shut you down. I think that it's a hard one to learn, but you do learn it.
Carol, what about you? You have a teaching studio, and how do you tell your students, what kind of methodology do you suggest to them for building a life in music? I think what Jackie just said about careers going a different direction must have happened to you, from switching over from Beethoven to the kind of music you're writing and playing now.
Yes, and what I can say to that is thank goodness for Teachers College, and thank goodness for the Master of Arts program here in Arts Administration, because I learned from that program how to manage my career as an artist. So I initially thought when I finished that master's program I would go on to manage an arts organization, but it ended up helping me as a do-it-yourself artist to know what to do, to how to manage the finances, to how to set up a budget, to how to conduct yourself.
How do you conduct yourself?
Very carefully. But I have to say the business side, I did learn in the outside world. So I know my bio, it says Guitar Center, which is a little confusing because I'm a pianist, but I do work with Guitar Center, which is the largest, world's largest music retailer. And that's where my CD is, and that's where I sell it, and that's how I make money when I'm not private teaching. And so, of course, I share this knowledge with my private students who want to go on and become concert artists. But we live in the 21st century. There's so many opportunities now to make music that have nothing to do with being a professional. Most of the students that I teach want to be recreational, and they just want to have fun when they're learning to play the piano. So I have to customize each of the lessons, to accommodate that. But if I do have a student that's serious, I can lay out the path for them and take a little bit of the mystique away from how to do it. So it's really just following the yellow brick road. Now social media is so important. You have to delve into it, whether you like it or not. It's a necessary evil. And you have to know how to conduct yourself on Facebook and LinkedIn and Jill, I see you. And all of those, things that are out there to help you to build your career.
I see Dr. Ruth here, and in her wonderful session an hour ago, she spoke of being so influenced through her life, having joie de vivre kind of built into her early childhood. And because she had a warm and loving family relationship then, it has, in effect, lasted her whole life. What was your childhood like, and where?
Oh, I had a great childhood. I grew up in Mississippi, believe it or not, the poorest state in the Union. But I was born in the Mississippi Delta. I was born in Yazoo City, and I had a grandmother who believed in education, even though she wasn't that educated herself. But she actually taught me my first notes on the piano, and she taught herself, and she taught others in the community. And a lot of it was just done through just love and care and patience, So one day she said, okay, Carol, we're going to learn middle C today. And then she taught me middle C and the other Cs. And then when I was 7, that's when I studied with Clara Thompson, who had gone to Teachers College. So my parents weren't professional musicians, but my mother did play piano. She played organ. And my father, just for the joy of it, he played guitar from time to time. And there was always music in the house. So either I was listening to it or I was playing an instrument. And I grew up with a piano in the home. And I just remember having a really great childhood. I don't feel like I missed out on anything, and I feel like music was a great part of that.
And Jackie, what about you?
Well, actually, very similar things. And piano in the house. Parents self-taught musicians. My father played in a jazz band. He played drums and piano, not at the same time, obviously. He, went between them. And my mother would also play piano. And she couldn't read music, but if she heard a song, if she heard something on the radio, she could recreate it. I can't do that. I don't know how she did it. She just had a really great ear. They didn't necessarily encourage me to be a professional musician. I got to go for piano lessons and voice lessons, but my father really wanted me to be a lawyer. So, oh well. Didn't quite work out. But there's an element of performance in both professions, I feel. So.
The other thing I'm curious about is your experience with recordings. I mean, it's one thing to play for an audience when you have concert hall, even the Anonymous Four, you have a whole audience there that is part of a community listening, and you get the feedback from the audience. You can, as a singer, you can look at them and see what's happening and see if anybody's dozing off and that kind of thing. How different is it for you in the recording studio when none of that is there?
Oh, absolutely. It's not a spontaneous experience. I mean, you do so many takes of everything to get it right. It's an element, it's a level of perfection that you try to achieve in a recording studio that you can't possibly achieve on stage, because it's for a different reason. Because when you perform, it's that moment in time that's captured with the audience and the performer. That moment of communication is very much off the moment, whereas a recording is there forever. And we work with a very strict producer called Rubina Young with Harmonia Mundi. And she really wants to make sure that the legacy is really there, so that when these recordings are listened to, however many years from now, they'll stand up, hopefully.
Listen, I hate to keep coming back to Dr. Ruth, but I was so taken by this last hour. But one of the other examples that she gave, I don't know if everybody was there, but one of the examples she gave was of a turtle that can't move if he stays safe in his shell. He has to stick his neck out in order to move, and once he does that, of course, there are any number of dangers that he has to or may encounter. So isn't there something kind of wrong about this pursuit of perfection? Doesn't that take away the spontaneity? Doesn't that take away the joy, the fun, everything else of
Well, I feel that neck sticking out happens in other situations, like in a performance. Like when you approach new repertoire, like when you walk into that audition and you're trying to sell yourself to a panel of people who you don't know. I think there's a lot of neck sticking out. I think the time to maybe it's basically the fruits of your labor, I feel, a recording session is. All the hard work you've put into learning that music, to practicing it, to performing it, comes to fruition at the recording session when you try to make it the best you can possibly do it at that in that moment. And that sometimes does take more than one take, I have to say. So yeah, I think that's how I feel about that.
And how was it for you, Carol, in the recording studio?
Yes, I agree with Jackie, and I just want to say hi to Dr. Ruth. Hi. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming. I'm so excited. But I have two different approaches to recording. So I can appreciate what Jackie is saying. You have to be perfect when you're in the recording studio. There's no room for error. And if you have to do it 100 times, you have to do it 100 times. But I'm lucky as a pianist because you can record two ways, and I've done both. I've recorded with the 9-foot Steinway, and that means I had to practice 3 to 6 hours a day to make sure it was perfect. So I would have to pay the engineer over and over again to keep recording me when I made a mistake. And then the second way I've recorded is using music software. I don't know if many people know about music software, recording software, and how to set up your own recording studio at home. But I work closely with an engineer, and what he's able to do is take what they call MIDI data. So I can record on a keyboard, but sound like I'm playing on a Steinway. And it costs a lot less money. It's a lot less time. I can make mistakes. The engineer can go in and just move the mouse to the note that was intended. So I don't have to be perfect when I record that way, and I get good results.
But isn't that cheating?
I knew you were going to say. I was like, okay, once I say this, somebody's going to say. You could call it that, but that's how it's done in the music industry. You save a lot of money. I mean, can you imagine if you just rely on human ability to play it perfect every time? Like, who does that? So, you know, you have to find the cheaper way out. And to be honest, a lot of people can't tell. Only the engineers with the fine-tuned ear can hear something's off in the parameters, or something's off in this wavelength, or, you know, they can hear something that's strange in the recording. But if you have high-end recording equipment, that shouldn't be an issue.
You make me very nervous. One of the things I have established, a kind of a self-imposed rule on the Young Artist program that I have at WQXR, is I insist that we use in-concert recordings when it's not done right there in the studio, because I want to know how well the pianist, violinist, whatever, can play, and not how smart the engineer is to piece together little things. So you've made me very nervous. If you could do it on a MIDI, I might not catch it. I can actually tell you what happened. The reason I made that little rule for myself, I was listening long ago, this was in the early years of this program, and I was sent a tape from England. It was a tuba player. And I'm listening across the room to this tuba player. Wow, I mean, fantastic, doing things that you wouldn't expect from a violinist. And then I wanted to listen to something again, and I went over to the tape machine, and all of a sudden, as I played it, I see splice, 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 splice. Now, those were days of literal tape and literal paper splices or plastic. And all of a sudden, I realized I wasn't hearing this guy really playing. I don't know how he did play in real life, but if I had to put up with all those splices, I'm not being fair to the projection of this person's artistry. So that's why I made the rule. But it's kind of fascinating, the intricacies of recordings, and even things that are allegedly recorded in concert are not. I mean, if you're smart enough, I remember the Horowitz return to Carnegie Hall. The first couple of notes, there was I don't know, I remember what it was, but he played a wrong note or messed up something. Out comes the recording, allegedly live and allegedly absolutely perfect. So somebody did something in there, but.
Yes, I agree with you. I mean, you have to have a certain amount of integrity too, you know, and.
I think definitely if something is billed as a live recording, it should be a live recording.
Yeah, exactly.
I absolutely agree about that.
Now, Carol, speaking of recordings, you have one more, and tell us about it, and how cheaty is it?
Oh, now he wants to know the good stuff. I'm telling my secrets. Well, first of all, I hope you can stand it. It's another heartbreak song. This one's called Faint Memory. So I wrote this after the breakup, and but it's based on a simple melody, a simple harmony, and it's featured on the C major CD, my full-length CD. But it's called Faint Memory. So Hezzy brings this up, but this was recorded in a studio. I was there.
Well, that's a start.
With an engineer, with a Yamaha motif. Anybody know what that is? It's a workstation. So on the back of the motif, you have MIDI connection. That's a 5-pin connection, and you connect the cable to your computer, to an interface. Okay, and so it captures all of my movements, and then that goes onto a program on the computer called Logic. Anybody know Logic? Okay, and then once you record it into Logic, you mix and master everything into Pro Tools, and voila, you have the recording. Now, if it's not to my liking, I can re-record it, or when I listen to it, I can just make the edits.
Okay, and it's called Heartbreak?
My theme is Heartbreak and Wonder, but the name of the song is called Faint Memory.
Okay.
It's about 3 minutes and 37 seconds. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I don't wish you many more heartbreaks, but if they if they lead to music like that, it's, you know, at least we have something out of it.
Thank you.
All right, let's see if any of you folks have any questions for, yeah.
I was just wondering, Carol, if you had any sense of the effect of social media and every other way of getting your work out there. Does that make it longer or harder or shorter to actually make a living on being a musician?
We're talking about art form. You don't want to make a living too.
I just really, when you're talking about building careers and getting the how-tos, I just was wondering.
Right. It just depends on your approach. I mean, you have to be very brave, and you also have to be very focused and very strategic about it. And so Guitar Center helped to take some of the mystery out of that for me. So they laid it out. They said, these are the ones you should be on, these are the ones you should not be on. And then if you were going to be on these 3, you know, then get training on how to conduct yourself, you know. So it's a post a day, a picture a day. What are you having for lunch? You know, people want to know that. You know, it seems trivial, but it gets you a following. You know, bring yourself up from, you know, 1 like to 100 likes. You know, how are you going to do that? You know, and get the word out about your music. But monetarily, I think it helps to be in control of the physical product. So that's why I have my CD in a store. I'm in control of the marketing. I'm in control of the profits of that. I'm not just relying on the pennies that you get from iTunes to trickle in once people pay that 99 cents to download your single. So, but it's important to have a presence on iTunes. You have to be out there. You have to be seen. But I think you just have to limit yourself and to know which ones to pick and choose.
Yes, Dr. Ruth.
3 of us walked in a moment late. Did you say how you got to WQXR?
How did I get to QXR?
Yeah.
Well, how did I get to QXR? Frankly, there was a little nepotism involved. My mother was Nadja Reisenberg, pianist, who in the 1930s and 40s played fairly regularly on WQXR. When there was a chamber music series, she and I think Joseph Schuster, the first cellist of the Philharmonic, gave the first chamber concert. So I grew up listening to Mother, and listening to Mother at home, obviously, but also on the air. And I loved the idea of I got very excited about sharing what I liked to hear with other people. I would say, listen to this trumpet solo, isn't this exciting? And I remember one of my very first great expenditures. I fell in love with the Haydn trumpet concerto. This was, I guess, with trumpet on my mind. And there was, at that time, only one recording. It was on a 78. One side was the second movement, and the other side was the finale. I didn't care too much about the second movement, but I loved the rondo. And I couldn't find it anywhere. And finally, in some rare record shop on I remember where it was now, 81st Street possibly. But whatever it is, I found it there. And it cost $5. For a kid, $5, that's a big money. But, you know, most records were 78 cents or whatever it is. $5? I said, why are you charging so much? He said, have you tried to get this? But anyway, I knew I wanted to do something in music. I played the piano, but I didn't have the discipline to be a real pianist. And yet, I knew I wanted to do something in music. And again, the connection with QXR was sort of resonating vaguely. And even though I didn't have any idea of what I was doing, I felt that's where I could do something. My enthusiasm for music and sharing things might lend itself to radio. Well, it did, and everybody that I talked to, I was in the Army then, everybody I talked to said, well, you have to go out to some small radio station in the Midwest and learn the ropes, and then maybe you'll come back someday. Mm-hmm. And just on a lark, I wrote a letter to QXR, and I had taught myself to type in the Army because it was better than anything else the Army wanted me to do. And sure enough, I got a job as a typist at QXR. And so I started there. Most exciting day of my life was that first day when I was working at QXR. And gradually, I moved up the ladder. It took 12 years before I went on the air. I was program director by then. But I realized that I had a talent for conversation with artists. I had known so many of them that they didn't frighten me, and yet I was in awe of what they could do. I mean, Benny Goodman is in the house all the time, and my mother's first recording was with Benny Goodman. So, I mean, these are artists, and my aunt, who is a famous player of the theremin, toured with Paul Robeson. So Paul Robeson's at the house all the time. So I grew up in this milieu, and it just seemed to be natural for me on the air. And once I got on the air and found that I could do it without making a complete jerk of myself, that's where my attention went, and eventually I stepped down as program director. I avoided the Peter principle, and I did not go up the corporate ladder at QXR. I moved over to broadcasting. So in the short term, that's basically what happened. All right, now we got off the tack here because we're trying to have these wonderful guests here. But anybody else with any thoughts or ideas? No thoughts. I guess they must like everything you do. What are your plans in the future? What do you have in mind? What's next up?
Yes, well, I will be working on a new recording. I started to work on a new recording, and so possibly by the summer, I might launch a new recording.
What kind of material? Similar to what we've heard, or is it changing direction?
Similar, you know, simple harmony, simple melodies, but it's all based on, you know, how I feel and how I like to express myself. So it's a work in progress. But it's developing over time, you know, the songs.
So much wonderful music is based, in a sense, on the way composers feel. Some of those beautiful music, second movement of the Chopin second concerto, apparently was, he was in love with this woman, but was so afraid to approach her that he didn't, and he never did. And she only found out about it after he died. But he poured out, because he couldn't, too shy to talk to her, he poured out his feelings in this music. And just the other day, 2 days ago, we were in the studio, and artist played, two artists obviously, played the Richard Strauss violin and piano sonata. And same thing, I didn't realize it, but apparently that gorgeous slow movement was, he was in love with someone who apparently later did become his wife, and this was his way of communicating. And we know the story of Robert and Clara Schumann, the same kind of thing. It was through music that they expressed their own emotions. So you have a way of doing that as well, so that's kind of nice. And Jackie, thoughts, plans, ideas?
Well, the big thing for me is that in December of this year, Alumnus 4 will no longer be touring or performing together. We end this year. So that's always a great, it's an exciting thing and a challenge, and the work that I've been doing as a voice teacher, as a soloist, I will continue to do. I've got some projects that are in development right now, actually in contemporary opera, as new music was my first love, and new opera was something that I did a lot of. I'm involved in a interesting project. A composer called Phil Klein and a filmmaker called Jim Jarmusch are developing an opera about Nikolai Tesla. And I've been singing the role of Catherine, because it's in development, so it's excerpts. The lady who was very much in love with Tesla, but he was not interested. He seemed to be more interested in a pigeon. He says, I'm really not making this up. He was madly in love with a pigeon, and he wrote letters about the pigeon. And about how beautiful she was, and how when he looked into her eyes, he could see his soul. It's very sad. So Phil said that to music for Tessa to sing. But anyway, it's kind of an interesting project. And the other thing that Phil is also writing a monodrama for me, which is based on the life of Joan Crawford. And when he told me, his email said, "Think of the shoulder pads." So I am. So there's definitely a lot of interesting new paths for me to go down, I think, in the next year or so, I hope.
Wow. And I guess, Dr. Ruth, even you never had problems with somebody in love with a pigeon before. Only turtles. Again, chance for you to interact with our guests. Yeah, okay.
Can you elaborate on your connection to the Guitar Center? Are you employed by them? Do they market your music? Do you teach there?
Yes, a little more clearly, what is the Guitar Center and what's it got to do with piano and you?
Well, thank you. It's a big connection. When I was in Mississippi, actually when I returned to Mississippi, my intention was to work in the arts, and I did that. I worked in community arts with the state, and then I turned my attention towards music teaching, so then I became a private piano teacher, but I also worked in a music store, and it was a mom and pop store, and so when I ultimately came back to New York, my idea was to work for, a bigger, company, and it happened to be Guitar Center. So they hired me because I had, sales experience and retail experience, and I get to sell, keyboards all day, basically, and that's what I do. I work in professional audio. I work in keyboards. I'm the only woman salesperson there. In technology. They have a new Guitar Center that just opened in Times Square. And they have a really great employee program called GAIN, G-A-I-N, and it's just an inside program for the ones that work at Guitar Center. You can sell your CD. If you have some original music that you've written and you've recorded it, they will let you sell it and you make all the profits. And it's up to you to sell it. And so I've been very happy with the way it's turned out. I've had one of the top selling CDs in the company in the past year, and it's going on the second year, and I feel really great about it, so that's the connection.
And that's a wonderful commercial/artistic connection, which is extremely valuable. Again, any other comments or thoughts?
I have a question about
Yeah.
composition, because I'm curious in terms of when you, Carol, when you create music, do you hear it in its entirety, or does it come to you in snippets? Do you sit down and then it kind of takes on a life of its own?
Fascinating question about the compositional process. What is it for you? Do you, first of all, do you compose at the piano, and is it sectional, or do you kind of envision the whole piece already?
I love this question. Thank you so much, and thank you for saying that. I'm just so excited about this because I didn't know I would write this way. I write two ways. Either I'm away, like driving in a car, and a tune just comes to me, and I hear it, and I don't know if it's going to be an entire tune or a section of a song that I will eventually write. And then I will get home and try to remember what I've heard. And it's also a test, because I know if I can remember it 3 days later, it will stick and it's good. So, but there are other times when the whole piece just comes. I'll wake up in the morning and it's just like a whole song in my head. And then I go over it, and thank goodness I can sit down and play it, because I do have friends who can't get that out, but I'm able to get that out. And the real test comes sometimes in a live performance. I work, I haven't mentioned this, but I work closely with the chaplain's office at Columbia University. I'm an artist in residence there now, and they let me do my concerts there. I have a concert coming up on June 16th for anybody that's interested. It's going to be a concert that takes place at noon. It will be a concert of Negro spirituals, but in the styling of C major. So they let me experiment with that. So it's my own arrangements of spirituals, which is, the chaplain likes that. But they've let me play a lot of my original songs there as well in the evening concerts, and I premiered a song that I didn't know how it would work. I just composed it at home, and it was my first time playing it there, but it came out really well.
So do you revise things based on your concert performance? I mean, do you say, oh, this part worked, but this one needs a little jiggling?
Yes, I do. Thanks for asking that, because you know, sometimes it doesn't work too well. I'm thinking, okay, I need to change that section. Or, you know, the other surprising thing is that sometimes in the middle of a concert, I'll just forget. And then because I wrote it, it's not a mistake. I'll just I'll just go to a different departure and then come back once I remember where I was harmonically. But yes, I've had to rework some of my songs to make them work better, especially when I get ready to record.
If I could just add to that, I think also as a performer, when you do a performance of something, I mean, I'm not a composer, but if I put a recital program together, or Anonymous 4 puts a program together, the audience response and feedback to a new program is just invaluable, because you really get a sense of, okay, well, maybe we like this piece, but maybe the audience doesn't like it quite so much, so we won't do that one, but we'll substitute something else. You really get a sense for it, because you create these things in isolation, right? It's when you get the reaction to it that you really know what works and what needs changed and what, you know, what can stay. So I think that's really the process we go through, I think.
I've what Carol was saying about getting lost sometimes, but it's your own piece, so you didn't really. I feel that way very often as a broadcaster, interviewer, because you can't go out on stage and say to be, or, well, look, what I'm trying to say is, see, that doesn't work. But when you're ad-libbing, when you're speaking whatever you're saying, and it's not scripted and prepared, and nobody knows what it's supposed to be, you can't really make a mistake. You can blunder a little bit, but you essentially, nobody knows what it's supposed to be, and therefore it doesn't bother me if it comes out a little differently than I had hoped. Yeah. So that's part of the thing. Yeah?
I have a question for Jackie. Earlier you mentioned being able to ask the composer a question. I think that's really interesting, because you sing both very new music where you're able to interact with the composer, and also very old music where the composer is
bit rough.
dead.
Yeah.
And I was interested in what you have to say about how that's different.
Well, it's funny, because when I joined Anonymous 4, they really hadn't done new music at all, but that was my background. So one of the reasons they wanted me to join was that because I would encourage, I would approach composers for us, and I would help get commissions. So they were a little startled by the fact that suddenly there was a live composer around, because they'd never encountered the problem before. It's such to me it's such a wonderful thing, because when you're working with someone, especially when they're writing something for you to perform, there is such a great element of collaboration. You can actually, you can talk to it. You can say, this isn't going to quite work for the range of the group, or for my personal range, or what kind of effect do you want to have here. I actually do workshops with composers. I'm a visiting artist at various universities, and one of the things to working with composers is so they can actually ask me questions, about, well, can you sing this note? What happens if you do this? What happens to your voice? Is it technically possible to do this? When you're dealing with something that was written, a long time ago, you certainly hope that the person writing it was working with a singer at the time, and therefore did have some insight into the voice when they wrote it. But it's, on the other hand, when the composer is long, long, long gone, especially with medieval music, you don't even know who the composer was for the most part. You can kind of get away with some things because they're not there to complain about it. So there's plus and minuses, pros and cons, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah, there are fascinations both ways. Did you have another? Somebody did.
This is my second question. So
Well, that's all right. I'll come back to you in a moment. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to comment on how you are, actually all three of you demonstrate the power, the transformative power of music, which is kind of the theme today. So thank you for that. I was wondering, do you have a place, a site, where you either have performed your specific
Well, we've actually performed Hildegard of Bingen's music in Bingen. Hildegard of Bingen, who's a German, composer, mystic. We performed her music in Bingen at the church that she worked in. So that was very site specific. And our new program, our last program, is actually Civil War songs entitled 1865. And we're about to perform it on April 23rd at Cooper Union here in New York, which is where Lincoln gave a very famous speech. So when you have those kind of connections, it's pretty exciting, I have to say. Yes. So yes, and then other times you just hope the space works well with the music and the sound you're trying to create. Also, that doesn't always, singing chant in a black box theater with a low ceiling is not the best. Not my idea of a good time. Let's just put it that way.
I was going to say.
Did you want to add something?
Oh, yes, I just wanted to add about the performance space. For me, anywhere there's a Steinway, I'm comfortable. So at St. Paul's Chapel at Columbia University, I've been doing concerts there, and I'm very happy. Yeah.
All right, you started our questioning. You finish it now.
I was just wondering, when you're working with a group that's concerned, obviously, about its relationship with its audience, is there a big tension between wanting to push the envelope and making sure that you're doing something new that will maybe push the envelope for the group, as opposed to giving the audience its, for lack of a better term, old favorites?
I think, to be honest, well, with Anonymous the group was formed to sing medieval music in women's voices, to explore that. And I think that and then we moved into Americana and Shape Note and some new music too, as I was saying. But I think that with all of that, there was definitely a feeling of, we want to sing this music in a way that works for us, that authentic up to a point. I mean, you can't really know what's authentic anyway when it's something, that was written a long time ago. But ideally making it appealing to an audience, but without compromising what we do and what we feel is we do best.
Disagreeing among yourselves.
Oh, I see. Oh, well, no, that's a whole other story. Yes, it's kind of interesting. We don't have a conductor. There's only the four of us. And of course, it's an even number, 4. So when it's 2 against 2, that can get difficult. What we do is we tend to, we will try everything. If we feel that something is really going to work well for a piece and we think the audience will like it, and somebody else violently disagrees, we still have to try it, because sometimes they can be persuaded. And really most of the time we're all in agreement as to what we think is going to work best. But equally, as I was saying earlier, then we get the feedback. Then we feel, oh, this program is a little too long. Oh, there's an energy drop in the middle. We need to change the piece. There's too many slow pieces. That's usually the problem. There's lots of very slow pieces. So we will discuss that, of course, also amongst ourselves. I think we should do this. I think we should do that. And we also voicing. We also figure out who should sing what. We try to vary it so that it doesn't always sound the same, though. I'm one of the higher voices, so I tend to be more on one of the top lines. But there's definitely there's a lot of dialogue between the 4 of us about what we think is going to work. But we don't usually, we're not, I personally am an envelope pusher in my solo stuff, but the group's not really. It's much more about finding things that we like to sing that work for our 4 voices, and then hoping that other people will like them too. So.
Well, we've certainly had some wonderful, they've got 4 voices in Anonymous, but we've got 3 voices here at the table, and it's been very exciting. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, our Carol and Jackie.